Great to see so many people here. Hello, welcome from wherever you're joining in the world. And welcome to this webinar in which we will be going through the second iteration of the certifications initiative that Travalyst have recently launched. Just wanted to start with a few introductions. My name is Anna Dakin. I am a new member of the Travalyst team. I've joined as project manager and I'm driving the certifications work. I'm joined today with two of my esteemed colleagues, Aromika Bhattacharya, who is our data strategy lead, and Casey Ambunan, who is head of policy, advocacy and compliance. So quickly to take you through our agenda for today. We're going to start with a bit of background quickly on who we are, what we do at Travalyst. Then we're going to dive into some regulatory context, so the regulation that's been driving this work. Then we're going to dive into the meat of the Certification Initiative 2.0, what we've been working on and what it means. Finally, we'll touch on how you can get involved in that work, and then hopefully we'll have some good time for Q&A at the end. We are expecting a lot of questions. There are a lot of questions in this space, so we'll try and address as much as we can. But you're always welcome to contact us in the follow-up as well. So with that, I will hand over to Aro.
Thanks a lot, Anna. Hi, everyone. Welcome everybody to this webinar. We are so very excited to be sharing all of this with you today. It's been a long journey. But before we get here, let's come to a short introduction of Travalyst, who we are and what we do for those of you who might not be as well versed. We are a global, independent, not-for-profit organization that has been founded by the Duke of Sussex. And as an organization, we are a pre-competitive coalition of some of the biggest names in travel and tourism. You can see some of the names that are listed at the bottom of the slide. Our partners together represent a combined market value of over $3 trillion, and our work is guided by our independent advisory group or the leading experts and academics in this sector. So this is about who we are, and now about a little bit about what we do, because that is very important as in a run-up to the certifications initiative. Travalyst as an organization mobilizes and convenes the industry to deliver clear, consistent, and compliant sustainability information that is open for all of us to use. And our certifications initiative feeds exactly into this. So therefore, the importance of introducing this bit before I hand over to my esteemed colleague, Case, the head of compliance, so that he can take us through the regulatory context. Case, over to you.
Yeah, thank you, Aro. Welcome, everybody. If we can go to the next slide. Yeah, excited to talk about what triggered the next iteration, the second iteration of our certifications initiative. But before we dive in, I want to do a couple of important statements here. Is that this information that we're providing today is not legal advice. We're not the entity that are deciding if your organization is compliant or not. That is really up to the EU authorities. Also, Travalyst has not set these rules. It is EU legislation, and this legislation has gone through a legislative process and has been adopted by all EU member states. We have engaged with the European Commission and the team that has drafted the law. We have shared the feedback that some of you provided us with some of the things that are not more completely clear based on the legislation. It's important to highlight that this directive is industry agnostic, which means that it's set for all different kind of industries, including tourism. So there might be different interpretations per industry on how this legislation will be implemented. If there are things unclear, we would highly recommend you to seek legal advice here, right? It really depends on your individual circumstances, on specifics, etc. So it's very hard in any case to provide legal advice for us. What we have done, we work together with Vedder, a law firm from the UK. Very thankful for that, where we have tried to give some context to some of the requirements that are applying to your organizations. Next slide, please. So a little bit of EU law, back to the university, but I think it's important to set this context. So it's an EU directive. And we're talking obviously about the EU Empowering Consumers for the Green Transition Directive. It's a binding legal act and will be applicable in all EU member states. These are the directive aims to harmonize this law across all EU member states, and it's setting minimum standards. What countries, individual member states can do, they can go above and beyond and set stricter rules or start implementing this legislation slightly earlier. So some member states already starting with this kind of legislation in March. So it's important to realize that because this can create a bit of confusion. So the official, I want one thing more to highlight, please. So the official deadline for all EU member states to implement this law is 26 September 2026. It's important that it's not prescriptive, right? So I think that also can cause some confusion. The legislation or this directive, in some cases, is purposely fake, right? And leaves some room for the specific industry to interpret certain rules. Again, it might differ per member state, but deadline 26 September. And while please don't take this as legal advice, but it's very uncommon for member state enforcement authorities to go out and start taking severe action. Next slide, please. So when we dive into the actual legislation, again, this is the EU Empowering Consumers for the Green Transition Directive. It will apply from September 2026. And what it does, it is the displaying sustainability labels which are not based on certification schemes or which have not been established by a public authority will be prohibited. And this legislation also gives a definition of what defines a certification scheme. So there's a couple of key principles here. It's about transparency, stakeholder consultation, and monitoring of compliance has to be done by an independent third-party auditor. It's important to read this law in conjunction with the Consumer Rights Directive and Unfair Commercial Practices Directive. These are existing laws, and sometimes what you see is you find principles or requirements, and the definitions are not in this new law, but they refer to these earlier laws. So if there's things unclear, you might find some more clarity in the existing laws that's highlighted here. Again, while this directive is EU specific, it applies to displaying sustainability information to EU consumers. So this, by default, has global implications. So if a platform or another stakeholder wants to display sustainability information, it has to comply with this law. So if you're an organization certification scheme outside of the EU and you want a platform or hotel to display this kind of information to consumers, you have to follow this law. Next one. So what is the definition? So I give you some time to read through it yourself. Certification means a third-party scheme mainly. What are the criteria that defines the certification scheme? It needs to be open on a transparent, fair, and non-discriminatory terms to all accommodation providers. So everybody needs to be able to join. The certification scheme needs to be developed together in consultation with relevant experts and stakeholders. Also, there needs to be a procedure for dealing with non-compliance. So if an accommodation provider, for example, is not living up to the earlier requirements, there needs to be a procedure to take this label away from an individual hotel. And more importantly, the compliance needs to happen by a third party. And the third party needs to be independent from both the scheme owner and the accommodation provider. And the third party competence needs to be based on international, EU, or national standards and procedures. Again, this is specified more specifically in the law, but especially around the international standards, etc., it might cause some confusion. This is one of the areas we're trying to seek more guidance from the European Commission, but whether we will get that or whether the industry at some point will get that, that remains to be seen. Next slide, please. So why is this so important? So I think as Travalyst, as Romke just has highlighted, sharing sustainability information with consumers is key. And we strongly believe that if a consumer is provided with the right information, hopefully they make more informed decisions. So at the moment, certifications are important and currently the only tool for communicating sustainability information with the consumer on platforms in a reliable and compliant way. So what we like to avoid is that certification schemes that are compliant but are not aware of this law, or there's clarities and there's uncertainty, etc., that they have to stop being displayed. Over to you, Aaron.
Thanks a lot, Kees. Hi, everyone. So with that regulatory context, let's get into what is the main reason that we are all here today, which is to look at what the second iteration is and how that is different from the first iteration. So before I get into the second one, let's do a quick recap of what the first iteration was and what we did there. So the initiative was established in the absence of good governance criteria that a third-party certification scheme were required to meet to be displayed on platforms. That's really important to call out because this is back in 2023 when we set the initial set of criteria, and the first list was published in 2024. So that is what we call the first iteration. The list of 60 entities that met our initial set of criteria, and these entities included certifications, standards, and schemes, and others, was then made public on our website, and that is still available on our website. So that's the V1 or the first list. What we also did in the first iteration was we made available a Travalyst logo, and this was meant to help certifications communicate their inclusion on the list. So that was again something that was available in the first iteration, and all of this was made available on our website 2024 onwards and still remains in part available. But all of this will be updated in the second iteration. I'll just get through it in a moment. But before we do that, I do want to mention that this was what we called the first iteration, and it was always meant to be built upon. So it was the first step, and what we are doing today is basically the second step or the second iteration to our certifications initiative. So let's get into what we did. So it was a long process, and it took us 1 full year. And the focus was on the incoming regulation. So as Kees just mentioned, there is regulation that is incoming. It is going to enter into application starting 27th of September. And we knew that it was going to have global impact on certification schemes and all other stakeholders in this industry. So with that in mind, what we did was an entire process which started in January, and it included drafting and engaging with all of you. So what is it that we did and who were the stakeholders? You can see that on the slide. The stakeholders included coalition partners, industry experts, associations, independent advisors, schemes, and accommodation providers. And the way we did this was using various formats all throughout the year. So it was bilateral meetings, multilateral forums, we had one-on-one meetings, we had partner sprint meetings, we also had legal oversight by our legal counsel, external counsel, Wedder, which Kees has already mentioned, who overlooked the entire process, and also the online survey that was made available to all of you. The response was very positive. I have to say that the sheer number and types of stakeholders that responded and the detail in which you responded was extremely helpful, and we do want to take this opportunity to thank all of you. And we do want to mention that we continue to receive feedback, and we do continue to also build back into the initiative. So it was a very big process, which we are today then taking you through in certain amount of summary and a holistic view. So let's go to the next slide. I'll walk you through all of the different themes of the feedback. Before we get into what the second iteration is, I do want to take us through all of the feedback, and there is a lot on the slide. I am very aware of that, but give me a few moments. We'll touch on the key themes because I know that these are still open for discussion and very important aspects of the implementation of this particular directive in the accommodation sector. So what we saw as the key themes is exactly what you see, which is the definitions. So some of the definitions that we received a lot of feedback on were the defining of experts, relevant stakeholders, publicly available, public authority, etc. The third-party auditing was another aspect, which was something that we received a lot of feedback on, and we continue to receive a lot of feedback on it. There are the aspects of competence, independence, monitoring, and of course, alignment with international standards such as the ISO standards. So that is something that we continue to engage with you on. Of course, there was the impact on the schemes from other jurisdictions and how it impacts everybody else. Case already touched on it, and we did receive a lot of feedback and questions as to how that actually plays out for everybody. There was a lot of feedback on alignment with the industry bodies. So I do want to say that we continue to engage with all of the industry bodies that have existing standards and approaches to certifications. That was also a very key part of the stakeholder feedback. And the increased transparency. So we have always been committed to having transparency in everything that we do, to bring transparency in the sector. And that is something that we are continuing to do with everything that we are making available to you. More on that later. I'll just come to exactly what the mechanism is. But you can also go on our website and see our all of the information that we share there. There's a part around the due diligence, which we know that there is a lot of feedback that we got on what aspects of due diligence we could be including in our iteration. This is something that we will continue to build back into the iteration. So that is something that we have also mentioned over here. And of course, the time frame. I do want to mention the fact that we are launching this initiative in January, and we know that we received a lot of feedback from some of you saying that it was ahead in time when the regulation or the directive is coming into application only in September. But the reason that we are doing that is because we understand that the industry requires time to understand what the letter of the law is, to assess their compliance, and also to become compliant. And this is not only for the schemes, but for other stakeholders as well. So which is the reason why we are doing this ahead in time. And we are looking forward to continue to engage with you throughout this entire process and over the coming months. So with all of that feedback, before I move on to the other slide, I do want to mention the fact that the Commission has also released a question and answer document in November of 2025. It's not linked in this slide, it's linked in following slides, but it does answer some of the questions that we did receive. So some of you might want to go back and look through that question and answer document, and you might find that to be helpful. But in addition, of course, we have the mechanism, which I'll come to just about now. Next slide, please. So that was a lot. And after all of that, what we came to, and that was the entire process that we followed. And what we came to was what the certifications 2.0 is, or the second iteration. So this was launched on our website on 28th of January this year. Before we did that, late last year, we actually reached out to a number of stakeholders and we did tell them that we would be doing this. So they were informed well in advance. What we have done in the second iteration is we have replaced the initial set of criteria. So what I was referring to earlier as the first iteration with the definition of the certification scheme as being set by the EU ECGT. And that is what our new 4 criteria are on the declaration form, but more on that later. The second iteration is now open to certification schemes only, because that is what the EU ECGT defines. It defines a certain the certification scheme, and therefore our second iteration is open to schemes that meet that definition. And of course, we are applying this to the accommodation sector specifically at first. What is also important to note is that this is required by law. So therefore, it is the responsibility of the schemes to ensure that they are compliant with the requirements as of this directive. And therefore, we do not require any proof of compliance. So that is not something that we will be collecting anymore. We do not review nor assess as an organization. And finally, the second list will be published soon. The first list is what you will find on our website right now, but we will be publishing the second list very soon. And it is going to be updated regularly, manually at the moment, but we will move to an automated format soon. And of course, the Travalyst logo that I mentioned as a part of the first iteration will no longer be made available to schemes. And the reason we're doing that is because we want to ensure that we avoid any misinterpretation of it as a sustainability label. So that is what we have in the second iteration. And finally, what's the output? So all of this information that I've shared with you, the entire process, the reason why we're doing it. So what's the output of the entire work that we did in 2025? It's what we call the mechanism. And this is what we reached out to all of you to provide us feedback for, which is the mechanism as the output of the entire process of which is aimed at supporting various stakeholders in the industry. So what does it consist of? It consists of everything that you can see on your screen. So in short, it's a list of various documents. So you have the overview document that explains the entire approach and the process that we undertook. It has the declaration form, which is for schemes to self-assess and declare compliance. There is a legal guidance note, which has been made available by external legal counsel, WEDR, which is available on our website, which is not legal advice, but you are required to look at it if you want to gain an initial understanding and before signing the declaration form. But we do encourage you to seek legal advice on compliance with the directive, of course, over and above the legal note that is made available to you. In addition, there is also the list of schemes. So this new list, or the second list, is basically going to be the list of schemes that are going to sign the declaration form or be compliant with the ECGT, depending on the route that you take. Case mentioned that in the previous section, so more on that later. And of course, there's a lot more information in addition to everything that we have shared with you today in the form of FAQs. And this can be found in our certifications webpage. Please do go have a look and read through that. We are continually updating it. So we update it as and when we receive feedback and we realize that something is important to be mentioned to stakeholders. So if you have already seen our FAQs, do of course revisit and review it again. So with all of that, finally, the aim, the reason why we're doing it, who benefits and how do they benefit? So the reason why we have done this is because we hope that our mechanism benefits the schemes, first of all, that are looking to self-assess and declare compliance with the incoming directive and declare the fact that they are suitable for display on the consumer platforms. Of course, our mechanism also benefits our partners and other stakeholders, such as accommodation providers, to identify which schemes are committed to compliance. And finally, it is the consumer that ultimately receives more clear, consistent, and compliant sustainability information, which is exactly what I was mentioning a few slides ago in who we are and what we do. So that is our second iteration in a nutshell. Now, before we wrap up and move to the question and answers section, I do want to get into this particular section, which is really important, which is how can you get involved in 2026? So there are two big work streams that we're working on in 2026, and we will continue to work with you on them. And your feedback and your input is very important. The one work stream is exactly what I have taken you through, which is the mechanism as a part of the second iteration. So that is the mechanism to self-assess and declare compliance for schemes, for them to be displayed on platforms and other industry outputs. And in addition to that is also the ingestion of the certification supply data or the certified property list into our data hub. And the aim there is to eventually make it available to partners and other stakeholders in a transparent and open access manner. It is a big piece of work, and we have just started this in 2026. And you have heard about this as the pilot of the ingestion of the data that we are currently undergoing, and we are actively inviting certification schemes to participate in it. I do want to say that this is the start of this, and we understand that there are lots of challenges in this area, and we look forward to working with you to identify these challenges and to solve for them together. So for more information on this, please, again, go back to our website and please have a look. And of course, you know where to reach us. You know the team, so please reach out to us and with any questions. To wrap up on how certification schemes can actually get involved, you can see that called out on this slide. There are basically three big blocks, as you can see on your slide. One, of course, is the fact that you self-assess and you declare that you are compliant with the incoming directive. That, of course, is mandatory, and that's been called out as such, mandatory in the sense of wanting to get displayed on platforms and other areas and get included in our list, it is mandatory that you actually declare compliance with the directive. So that's something that, of course, the declaration form is made available to you for. In addition, of course, the aspects which are optional is, of course, for certification schemes to provide us with their certified property list to the Data Hub and continue to give us the feedback of the sector-specific implementation of this directive. I had mentioned earlier that we are applying this to the accommodation sector specifically. So it is important that the certification schemes check for this in the declaration form. Please check that you are actually eligible, because we are applying this to the accommodation sector and working with the sector to understand how this gets implemented in this specific sector. So we continue to receive your feedback, of course, from certification schemes in the sector, but also other sectors, because we know that a lot of you have been writing in, and of course the Data Hub in terms of the ingestion of this certified property list information. So finally, the last slide before we move to question and answers, because I'm sure that there will be quite a bit over there, is a very simple process of what a certification scheme needs to do. We received a lot of questions around this, so we thought that this slide would be something that would be helpful. Of course, you review your participation, and to do that, you can see underneath that particular block all of the documents that we have made available as a part of the mechanism of the second iteration. So there is the overview document, there is the guidance note, and of course, then the question and answer document that I was earlier mentioning that the Commission had made available. Once you have done that and you are ready to declare compliance, you have the declaration form that we have made available. Again, that's also available on the website. This is being manually updated at this point of time as a list on the website, but we will move to a more automated format, again, using our Data Hub for it. So more on that later. And then finally, the last step, which at this point of time is the third aspect on the slide, which is optional, which is for you to share the information of your sustainability supply or the certified property list to the Data Hub. And that is the entire overview of everything that we have done. Hope that was helpful, and looking forward to all of the questions. And I'm handing back to you and happy to take any questions that come in.
Brilliant. Thanks so much, Ira and Case. There was a lot of information there. We are seeing some questions filter into the chat. So at this point, we'd very much like to invite you to submit any questions you have in the Q&A function. We'll be looking at the chat and the Q&A and see what we can get through. To kick us off, I think one question that, let me just stop sharing. One question that I think is just important to cover as we start is what happens to certification schemes that are already on the Travalyst Iteration 1 list, and what will be happening to that list?
Thanks, Anna. I know this is a question that we have received a lot. So in short, all certification schemes are required to reapply and get on the new list. So in other words, the process is very much the same for every certification scheme, because now schemes will be required to meet the updated definition of what a certification scheme requires to be under the EU ECGT. So which means that you need to meet that particular definition, which we have listed as criteria in our declaration form. So all schemes can come in, look at the declaration form, sign it, and then you will get added to the second list. And then that list is going to be made available on our website.
Brilliant. The second question that I think we've heard a lot in the lead up to this and may well have popped up in the chat as well. How does ECGT impact certification schemes that are outside of the EU?
That's an excellent question, and we have answered this quite a bit. Case, please feel free to jump in, but I'll give an initial, let's say, response to this, which is that the ECGT as a directive is, of course, looking to empower the European consumer. So therefore, any certification scheme that is looking to be displayed on consumer platforms that operate in the EU or communicate with the European consumer will require to meet the requirements, or will be needing to meet these requirements. So therefore, as a certification scheme, if you are looking to be displayed on these partner platforms that are global or wanting to communicate with European consumers, then you will be required to meet these criteria. So that is the impact, or therefore the global impact that Case has referred to, but also you have seen in our slides in the second iteration aspect, which is important. We know that there are certain schemes, because we heard of this as well, there are certain schemes that might not be looking to get displayed on global platforms or might not be looking at the European consumer as their target audience, which is absolutely fine. But this particular initiative is to make the list available of all schemes that do want to be applied, do want to be displayed on the platforms, and do want to communicate with the consumer. So therefore, that is the global impact that we've been referring to.
Great, thanks so much. So the next question that I think would be useful, I know we've heard this a lot in the lead up, was with regards to the Data Hub. So maybe it would be helpful just to clarify the link between what we're doing with the certifications initiative and how that connects to the Data Hub.
Of course, we have heard a lot of questions, and we have put up FAQs on our website. So please go to the section there and please have a look. But in short, our Data Hub is the enabler and the engine to all of the sustainability information that we are sharing with our stakeholders. So as I mentioned earlier, currently we're managing a big part of this process manually, which means we are making it available through our website. But in time, we will be automating the process, and we will be doing that through our Data Hub. So the list of the certification schemes that meet the criteria and that all of that information will also be made available through our Data Hub. This is something that we are working on. You will hear more about it in the coming months. In addition, of course, is also the fact that we have kickstarted the pilot to ingest the certification supply data into the Data Hub. And like I was mentioning earlier, the aim here is to make this data effectively available in a transparent and open access manner. It is an important aspect of building transparency in this space, and therefore the reason why we are doing this. We understand that there are challenges in this space that require the industry to come together to solve. And like always, we will be looking forward to working with all of the feedback that we get from you, from our partners, from all of the different stakeholders to continue to identify those challenges and to solve for them together in 2026. So the Data Hub, in short, is our enabler for everything that we do with the sustainability information.
Brilliant.
Hope that helps.
Great. So yeah, just looking through the chat, please do continue to share your questions. We will see how many we can get through. But one thing I've seen pop up is around accreditation. So we've had a good question here, which is, does the ECGT require certification schemes to be accredited in order to be compliant?
So our current understanding is no. Accreditation is optional, it is not mandatory, and it is one of the avenues of compliance. So if you were to go back to one of the slides, but if you were to also go back to the directive in itself and read it, accreditation is one of the routes that a certification scheme and a label, a sustainability label, can be taking to be compliant with the directive and therefore get displayed on the front end. So it is certainly not mandatory. And we know that there's a lot of discussion here. So I do want to take a moment to acknowledge that there's a lot of discussion around accreditation, third-party auditing, what is required. So we do want to take a moment to reiterate the fact that there is a lot of uncertainty in this sector. We acknowledge that. We might not necessarily have all of the answers, but we are committed to continue to work with you and our stakeholders. We will continue to engage with you on all of the uncertainties that you might be facing, and we will make that available to and share it with the Commission, as Case was mentioning earlier, and try and build back clarity. So that's the piece around accreditation and third-party auditing.
Great. So another question that I've seen a couple of times in the chat is just in terms of how we're working with other industry organizations and associations. So maybe you could just give a bit of an overview of the work we're doing with them.
Of course, other industry organizations and associations are a really important part of all of the work that we've been doing, and they are our strategic partners and our key partners in the industry. We have been continually engaged with them and involved with them in this entire process. And when I say the entire process, I would say the first iteration and the second iteration. We have engaged with them on multiple formats in 2025. So we have had bilateral meetings, we've also had multilateral meetings with these associations, and we continue to work with them depending on what their role is in the certifications initiative. So that is something that you will actively see a lot of work in the background, and we will continue to make updates about our progress with them in the future as well.
Great. Lots of questions coming in still, which is excellent. So another question that I've seen is around kind of existing data flows. So if certifications are already providing data, so I guess the question being, how does this mechanism that we're kind of introducing interact with existing data flows, which certifications and platforms might already be using?
That's an excellent question, and we have received that a lot. And what I do want to clarify is that we mentioned the fact that this is pilot. It is a pilot of ingestion of certification supply data, and that we aim to make it available to our partners and industry stakeholders in the future. We know that there's interest to ingest it from the data hub, but we do not aim to impact the data flows that the different stakeholders already have existing in the industry. So that is certainly not the aim. The aim currently is to start this entire pilot process, understand the challenges, work with you on building a solution which is effective for the industry, but it does not impact any existing data flows in the industry at this point of time. We will keep you informed of all of the challenges that we face, the solutions that we have to solve for, and what that means for all of our different stakeholders as we make progress. So watch out for that in the coming weeks and months.
Great. So I think one thing that might be useful to clarify, so there's a question in the chat just around kind of clarifying the fact that our initiative is focusing on certifications and not on individual kind of accommodation properties themselves. So I wondered if you just wanted to kind of clarify that. So it's clear.
Absolutely. Exactly what Anna was saying. And Anna, please let me know if there's any aspect of the question that came in that I haven't touched on. But our initiative is very much for the certification schemes. So in the first iteration, we had a set of criteria that scheme standards and other certifications were using. In the second iteration, we are very much focused on certification schemes as defined by the incoming directive. It is not meant or directed at the hotels directly. So we are applying this to the accommodation sector, as I was mentioning. So therefore, hotels or accommodation providers, they stand to benefit, but it is not something that is directed at them to sign or for them to self-assess and declare. This is very much for the certification schemes to meet a certain definition and therefore to get on a list of schemes that have declared compliance. Does that help?
I hope so. That's me.
Yeah. Okay, perfect.
Great. So I know we've spoken about the deadlines that Case has already touched on kind of the September 26th. But do you want to just maybe just clarify again so it's really clear the sort of fixed deadline that certifications need to work towards with respect to this directive?
Of course. So the deadline is the 26th of September 2026 is the deadline for the application of the EU ECGT directive to come into application in member states. And starting 27th of September 2026, this is going to be law in the European Union, and that member states would have by that date transposed this into their national laws. Case, please feel free to jump in and add any further clarifications if I missed anything. But those are perfect. So, but those are the dates. Hopefully it's clear. I know that there's a mention of 26th September and 27th September. 26th September, to be really clear, is the deadline. And starting 27th of September 2027, it enters into law in the European Union.
Great. Thanks, Aro. So one question we have in here is around partners sort of using the data. So maybe we could just touch on, the question is sort of, are there partners that have already agreed to use data from the Data Hub for their display?
We know that this is a question again that we've been receiving a lot, and we have been in continued discussions with our partners, and our partners have indicated to us that they are interested in ingesting this data from our data hub. When I say this data, I'm talking about the certified property list, I'm assuming, Anna, is what they're asking about. So there is continued conversations with our partners, and there is interest in ingesting this data the moment we are able to make it effectively available for them for ingestion. So that is exactly what we're planning to do and hoping to do with the pilot program. Of course, the ingestion of the data is completely at the discretion of our partners, and they would be the ones that would be deciding to ingest this data from our data hub and therefore use it in their data flows. So for further information there, we will urge you to reach out to specific partners to understand what their data flows are. From our end, we will do everything to make this data available. So as I was mentioning earlier, our aim is to make this data available for ingestion in an effective manner and to make it transparently available. And we will keep you informed of the progress that we make and therefore what happens to the data flows as we make progress with this. But this is a big piece of work which we have started in 2026, and you will hear much more about it as we make progress in the year.
Great. Thank you very much. Just having a look at the chat here. So there's a question in the Q&A relating to if we have an idea of timelines of when sort of cruises or sort of other, I guess, areas of the travel industry might fall under this work.
Yeah, that's a feedback that we've received a lot from various certifications and other industry stakeholders. We know that that certification schemes are also equally important in other sectors. Exactly what you were mentioning, Anna. So other sectors which are not necessarily only accommodation, but could be cruises or could be destinations or any other aspect of the travel and tourism industry. We are applying it first to the accommodation sector, but we are very much open to having a conversation with all of our stakeholders. And if we believe that there is the support that we can provide for those sectors as well, then we are very happy to engage with you in that conversation and see how we can build further on this iteration. But at this point of time, it is, of course, very specifically in the accommodation sector.
Great. A few people I think are asking questions that I think feed back to the due diligence piece. So I wonder whether it might be useful just to sort of reiterate the fact that we're obviously not kind of assessing schemes ourselves and sort of the role that we're playing, but also I guess the feedback that we've had with regards to due diligence.
Of course. So the due diligence was a really important aspect. I'm glad that we are getting into this. I can actually get into a little bit more of detail over here. So when we were drafting the second iteration and going through all of the discussions as to what the mechanism needed to be, there was a lot of discussion around what the due diligence process was needing to be. And I remember we spent a lot of sessions trying to understand what was the best position that we could take with due diligence. Something which is really clear as for us as Travalyst as an organization is that the EU ECGT is a directive which is going to enter into application and become law very soon. So as an organization, it is not our role to assess for compliance with law, and therefore we do not assess and we do not review. And that is the reason why we decided to take this stance in terms of the declaration form. The declaration form makes it really transparent in terms of what is required, and we make that available to you so that you can, as a certification scheme, for you to assess and for you to declare compliance. And we do not request for proof of evidence or proof of compliance to any of the criteria, because as I was just mentioning, that is not our role in terms of due diligence of assessing compliance. Having said that, there is another part of the due diligence program or the due diligence part that I know that is a very important aspect that we have received feedback on and we will be building on further. And that is about the certification schemes that are on our list. So there was a lot of feedback that we got on the fact that schemes will be on our list, and there needs to be a mechanism in place to ensure that there's transparency around the ones that are on our list and the fact that they have declared compliance, the date around that, etc. So we will be building that mechanism as we move forward. Currently, of course, we are focused on building the second list. So to actually build a list of certification schemes that are self-assessing and declaring compliance. But the next step to this will be building further on the due diligence so that we have a mechanism open to all stakeholders so that you can not only view, but you can also see when the declaration was signed and any other aspects of the due diligence that you would like to bring to our attention in terms of the different schemes on it. Hope that's helpful in terms of the due diligence, because that was a very important piece of the feedback that we received.
Brilliant. Thanks so much, Aro. So just mindful of time, there are many more questions and we really appreciate all the feedback and questions that we've had. And for those that we haven't been able to address today, we would encourage you absolutely to keep sending them to us. We would love to hear your feedback. I will be sharing the email address that you can use, and I see that Leia's mentioned it in the chat as well. So please do continue to input into this initiative. It is very much an iterative process. But given that we are now at 45 5 minutes. I am going to wrap this up. But a huge thank you again to everyone who's attended today. We really do appreciate your feedback, so please do continue to get in touch with us. But thank you so much for attending.